filed a lawsuit against every state agency in the country, including Texas, saying that they failed to provide public education to students with disabilities. Yes, there's a pandemic going on, but the suit asked for an order that would force schools to open to provide education to special ed students. If not, they asked for relief in several ways, including that school districts provide money that could be used for private school vouchers. Joining me this morning, Geneva Jones-Taylor, equity partner with Powell, Youngblood, and Taylor, whose practice focuses on Texas school districts with an emphasis on special education issues. Thank you for joining me. So tell me what the latest is. You said there's some movement this past week.
There has been. The courts in New York, which is the Southern District of New York where the case was filed, actually issued on Wednesday an order to show cause. And what that means is they told the plaintiffs, look, you haven't given us enough information to prove that you should even be able to have a case in this court because you haven't served any of the districts in other states, including Texas Education Agency or any of the public schools here in Texas. And you have until September 11th to bring us back proof that you have met all of these requirements to even make it before this court. And so that is a huge decision on behalf of the court. We're waiting to find out if the plaintiffs are going to be able to provide that information to the court. It's highly unlikely that they'll be able to sustain that, at least for our school districts here in Texas, which is good news for Texas families who are relying on public schools to provide education to their students, especially our special education students, who we know are one of our most vulnerable populations.
Now, it's pandemic is going on, but it's safe to say special ed students are in much greater need of in-person instruction than others. Is that not true? And how do you advise people who are dealing with those kinds of challenges?
You know, it depends on the student, and that's the benefit of the way the law was written. It's called the Individual Education Act, and the IEPs are individualized for the needs of the student. And for a lot of our students, they are going to learn better in the brick and mortar in-person instruction. And for some students, they may actually benefit from that distance learning environment. The point is, we have rights as parents of students with disabilities, and school districts have rights to work collaboratively to find out what program is going to work best. And the pandemic is new for all of us. Look, we just are learning as we're going along because we weren't prepared for this. No one in the country was prepared for the pandemic of this nature. That's why we're trying to work collaboratively together to find out how do we help students with disabilities. And we know for some students, getting them back into that brick and mortar classroom as fast as we can is what we need to do. In the meantime, we need to provide education to students, and the school districts are doing that to the greatest extent possible, considering the fact that for a lot of our communities, they were completely shut down. We had orders from our county commissioners shutting schools down, shutting in-person instruction down, all things of that nature. And so we couldn't even send someone into the home to provide that education during those times because we would be violating the order of our commissioners and violating the recommendations of the CDC. And so for those students, they received some instruction. Some of it was in person, some of it was going to the home, some of it was virtual, some of it was telephone calls. What I was very impressed with here in Texas is that our educators were working in immensely different ways to make sure they were providing whatever education they could to our students with disabilities. Even phone calls. We were going back old school and calling kids on the phone saying, hey, take out the workbook that we mailed to you. Let's look through it and figure out how to do these assignments.
So this suit, though, do you consider this more of a nuisance suit, or you have to take this seriously? And if it does go forward, it's talking about taking some money and applying it toward vouchers, which takes on a political tone, does it not?
It absolutely does. And we do take suits seriously because every time a public school is sued, we're taking taxpayer dollars to have to defend the public schools. And there are far better uses for taxpayers' dollars than fighting in litigation, especially when the petitioners are suing under a law that applies to public schools. It's the Individuals with Disability Education Act, which applies to public schools. They're suing under that law, and then they're saying, by the way, we want you to take that law that doesn't apply to private schools and potentially give us vouchers so that we can go to a private school that doesn't have to follow the law that we were suing you for in the first place.
Wow.
Those issues kind of seem like hypocrisy to me, and it's concerning to me because I support public education. I have a student with a disability. I understand what it's like to be a parent, so I'm not blind to both sides of the argument. But our resources are better spent providing for students in the classroom, providing the resources, providing the teachers, providing the service providers, occupational therapists, speech therapists, rather than fighting in a litigation that is likely not going to go anywhere because they haven't fulfilled the legal requirements to get into the court in the first place.
How would you, in the minute we have left, how would you tell parents to keep track of what's going on that if they have students with special needs, what's the best way for them to keep track of what's going on across the state that's going to be benefiting their students?
So what I want you to do is look at where your school is. What resources does your school have? What does your specific child need in order to succeed, and have that open communication? One of the things that we seem to forget about is we have an opportunity to talk to and work with the teachers, the principals, the special ed directors, even the superintendent, the school boards. Have that dialogue. What resources do we have? What can we do for the students in our communities? Because it's a localized issue in some regard, but then it's a global issue on the other, because we're having these huge litigations that are affecting all of our students. So communication is going to be the key, as well as being informed. If we have a conversation and we start talking about the options for school choice, what does that mean? Is this a clue that they're talking about something else?
Right.
Are we talking about vouchers, taking money out of public schools? Are we talking about building up public schools and giving parents choices within the public school system? And think about how that applies to your student and what's going to be best for your student and your community, because education is the foundation of our country. Absolutely.
Ms. Geneva Jones-Taylor, thank you for your insight about this issue. I'll put information on how people can contact you on my website, which is Houston Newsmakers page on clicktohouston.com. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time this morning.